All right, so welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today on the line, all the way from Dallas, Texas, I have Claire Haidar. Claire, I have that you are the co-founder and CEO of Wonder and PATTYRN. They are both, we're going to get into what they're doing. They're sort of AI-driven tools that'll help us with online and hybrid collaboration. I don't want to give it away before we get into that. So I'll stop there because you're cringing as I say it. So, well,
no, I'm not
get it right.
I'm smiling. Good,
Okay.
Lisette, it's so good to be here with you today. Thanks for inviting me to be on here. Really excited to have this conversation with you today.
I've been looking forward to it. So I want to start with the first question, which is, what does your virtual office look like and what do you need to get your work done?
Good. So this is the fourth virtual office that I've effectively built. So this is the fourth startup that we've built fully remote, fully not in person at all. I've been doing this with my team way before it was popular. And we were definitely one of those companies that used to get a lot of flack because we were building remote companies. We were always criticized and told that it wasn't a good way and an effective way to build businesses, etc. So it's very interesting to now be running what we've been doing for all these years in a place where it's the accepted norm. It's somewhat comforting to finally, not be the outlier, the crazy lone nut on the sidelines, but, actually just part of the crowd now. So in terms of what does it look like, I'm going to answer your question from a technology perspective, because ultimately that's what makes up a virtual office. So our core suite that makes up our virtual office is Slack. And we also use Signal, and I'll tell you very specifically why we have that differentiation between those two tools. We then use Zoom, and we're a G Suite company. So, we've got the whole Google Office suite that we use. And then naturally, there's a whole bunch of other tools that come around that. But our predominant work management tools within that communication stack that I've just laid out there for you is for our product development team, it's Jira. And for our marketing team, they use Trello. And then the rest of the company, so all of our other departments also use Jira as well. So that's what makes up our virtual office. And we're global. We're scattered literally all around the world. So there's some of us in Africa, there's some of us in South America, North America, Asia, we're everywhere. And yeah, that's us. Did I answer the question?
You did. I'm curious, how big is your team?
So if you look at the full team, so all of the suppliers that work with us and everybody like that, so for example, our outsourced HR team, and if you add all of those outsourced components into the company, we're well over 60. But if you look at the core team that are full-time employees within us, within Wonder itself and PATTYRN, we're just over 20. And I'm saying that because we're about to onboard a whole bunch of people.
Okay, still quite a significant size and team. And I'm saying, so you have one thing that stood out to me as you're describing your virtual office is you have different teams which are using a different set of tools. And there's a lot of companies out there that are trying to really mandate like one set of tools for the entire company. And we know that the one size doesn't fit all, that's for sure. But what I'm curious about with your team, given that you're using all these different tools, how do you find alignment within your team that you're all moving in the same direction, even though you're on different tools? And maybe this also speaks to why you use Slack and Signal. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
so if we can dive into that a little.
Yeah, very happy to. And Lizette, I think this is a really critical question that you ask, because as you say, it's very interesting for us as a veteran company in this space that have been doing this for so many years, to actually see how companies are trying to mandate that top-down, singular usage type of approach across the company, because we were one of those. We actually tried to do that in the very beginning and failed at it, which is why we've come back to the model that we're working from now. So it is actually a really critical question that you've asked. And quite simply, if any of your listeners have done any bit of research about me, or if they choose to do some reading about me afterwards, I've done a lot of research around chaos and chaos theory and how it's applied to work, okay? And I'd like to start with that before I answer the question specifically, because it's actually really important. It's a principle that will help people to think about this in terms of how they actually decide to structure themselves. So if you look at the scientific concept of chaos theory, when we hear the word chaos, the human reaction to it is, I want to organize it, I want to structure it. It's not something that I want to have in my life, you know, like how can I kind of manage the chaos? The interesting thing about it is that chaos is actually not disorganized at all. It's a highly, highly structured network, okay? But what makes it feel chaotic and disorganized is the fact that it's a network with hundreds and thousands of different nodes, and all of those nodes are connected. Okay, so you can think about those nodes, they're either individual team members within a larger company, or they're different geographic locations in a company. You know what I mean? So all of those things are nodes, but ultimately all of those nodes are connected. And so every time one node undergoes change, that change ripples out across all of the different nodes. And it's that constant movement and that constant flux, which is chaotic, but it's actually not disorganized. It's highly structured. And so one of the things that we need to remember is trying to harness chaos and trying to structure it. You don't do that by trying to make each of the nodes uniform. You allow each node to remain as it is, its own unique entity, its own unique thing, but you allow it to function in an intercollaborative way. And so with that principle in mind, that's how we essentially structure ourselves, you know? So what I can share with you is like our product development team definitely feel most comfortable and welcome and able to do their work inside Jira, okay? It's a product that was ultimately developed for developers, by developers, you know? And then if you look at why Atlassian as a company went and bought Trello, it was for that exact reason, is that Jira wasn't meeting the needs of what I would term more the business function units inside the company. So the finance teams, the marketing teams, the HR teams, which is why they purchased Trello, you know, and brought that into their Atlassian suite. And you can definitely see that, like our sales and marketing teams are a lot more comfortable in HubSpot and Trello as their working tools. And we're not trying to force them to make their way into Jira because it just doesn't feel organic or natural to them. We then have an entire delivery team that work in Workfront, okay, which is another work management tool. They feel most comfortable over there. And then, you know, some of our other teams within the company have, as just out of their own, have chosen Jira. And so to answer your question specifically about how we actually manage that, it's through automation. That's the trick. That's the key. So we have an ops team, and their number one mission outside of essentially just running the operations of the company, you know, so ensuring that we have machines, that those machines are protected and all of those typical operational matters, it's also their function in the company to make sure that all of our systems are talking to each other. So whatever needs to flow back to Slack, whatever needs to flow from Slack back into all of these different systems, all of those type of automations, it's a critical focus inside our company.
Oh, that's a very interesting, that's a very interesting fact, because one of the things that we are learning, of course, during the pandemic is that when people went online, we were all scrambling to get all of our workflow processes that we had in person at the office to go online, resulting in endless online meetings because we're all trying to manage the overhead of everything that's going on. And I really believe, like what you're saying, the answer to that is automation, and going through and like finding how do we automate the overhead so that all the deep work and thinking, that's the stuff that we're really good at. Like let the robots take care of, you know, like the easy organizational stuff. Yeah. And let us do the deep thinking. So this brings us into your product. So I would love for you to describe what is Wonder and what is Pattern and how are they working together to help you in this online world? And then we are going to dive into hybrid before this conversation's end. So just to.
Good. No problem. I won't spend too much time on this. So WNDYR is a consulting company, and we've developed a reputation in the market to be the go-to company for companies who are wanting to work better. They've figured out that something is not functioning the way they need it to function. Either customer outcomes are not what they want them to be, or their internal project management is not what they want it to be, or they're going through this insane transition that we all are going through right now, moving from a fully in-person to a remote company. And so we essentially help them to define their new work experience, and we then go and work with them side by side to actually implement that work experience into their technology stack. And so we help them define that, we help them select the tools and actually make that transition, and then go through all of that automation process with them. So that's WNDYR. Where PATTYRN comes in and becomes a critical part of that is, if you think about how we used to work, so like if you go like right back to like the industrial age, okay, a floor manager could walk out onto a production floor and he could actually see point A is functioning well, it's good, running like a well-oiled machine like it should be. Point K on the production line is very broken. Like there's an actual piece of machinery that's not working there right now. I need to get my mechanic team down there. I need to go and fix it, need to sort it out. If you think about it, work still flows in a production line today, but it's digital. Like everything is digital. It's scattered across all of these systems, and we don't have a single production line anymore. It's people anywhere. Like if you look at the working stack of people today, it's anywhere between, before the pandemic, it was 18 to 30 systems. That number has increased into the mid 40s to mid 50 range now.
Whoa.
Just frightening. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're feeling tired out there, there is a reason, right? Like you're not on crack. You really are tired.
Yeah.
There's
Exactly, because there's this like mental fragmentation happening. And so what PATTYRN does is it's a digital assembly line. We're essentially giving companies what their production line looks like visually in the cloud, digitally. And we're then pinpointing to them where the broken pieces are, or the less optimized parts of that production line are, with visual insights to show them, this is what you should be doing at this point, this is what you should be doing. Yeah.
I love this. I was just in a workshop right before our interview, in fact, where somebody was saying, as a leader in the organization, I've got the notes right here as I'm reading off.
Yeah.
As a leader in the organization, I don't have access to the information that's just hanging in the air. I can't. Before, I used to be able to walk around and see where the trouble was happening. It was obvious. And now I have no idea. So it sounds like what you're doing is you're visualizing that stuff that's happening in the air.
The fluff in the air. Exactly.
Yeah, the fluff in the air, that's actually totally critical to really good collaboration and moving things forward and innovating and hanging out together. It's like, it was annoying being in the office, hearing people shouting across the office, but in a way, like it was also really handy. Helped. Yeah, there's pros and cons to all situations, right? Pros and cons to all situations. Like working at home alone has also been a real struggle for people during this pandemic too. That's the other side of this. Okay, so it sounds like everybody needs to be able to visualize their work, and we need to be able to visualize our workflows and our own digital assembly lines, whatever those might be. And PATTYRN is the tool that you use. And I'm assuming, because I read on the website, it was you're using artificial intelligence in order to find these and to create these. Yes. How intensive of a process is this for companies? Say a company wants to do this with you. How intensive is it to take them through this?
So it depends how deep they want to go. You know what I mean? So we literally do have the full spectrum of companies. So we've got a handful of customers who have come to us and said, re-engineer us, like literally like take us apart and rebuild us. We're doing a full overhaul. Those are deep, intensive projects. You know what I mean? But these are companies that are committed. They have a full leadership team, a full board that are willing to go through that total transformation. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then you have what I would call the bulk of companies that sort of fall into the middle of the bell curve, okay, who want to do the full transformation, but they realize that there's too many barriers internally. You know what I mean? So they either have a split C-suite team who some see the value of it, some don't. They know that there's a lot of fragmentation in the actual, working group of people that will have to go through the transformation. And there could be very real realities within their market or their business sector. For example, they may be going through an M&A process, not a good time to do a full transformation. So what a lot of those companies would do is, what the majority of companies do is they will choose a department, okay? And generally what most companies do is they'll start with either marketing or sales, because that's the front line. That's the most important revenue generating line. They'll go through a transformation there, and then they'll take those learnings and slowly but surely roll it out across the org. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have more conservative companies who aren't willing to take the risk. They like the idea of it, but they know that the shock would be too big to the org to go through that. And so what those companies tend to do is, instead of taking a full department, they will take a single team. And, they will run it as an experiment on a single team. And then depending on the results that are yielded from that, they'll then maybe move into a full department, or they'll go full on committed and actually go through the full transformation. So those kind of tend to be there. And then the average project length would be approximately 18 months for a full transformation. Whereas, a departmental one can be anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and then a small team can be done very rapidly depending on the size of the team.
So one of the things that comes up for me when I hear this is, and one of the challenges that I face in terms of selling my own workshops or some of my own services, is that people don't know how much pain they're in. Like, we've hobbled together a working style. It's kind of working as long as everything goes well, but we don't really understand how much better it could be if we just put a few things in place. So I'm wondering, how do you convince people? Because you must run into the same thing when going to companies, is they know it could be better, but they don't absolutely know how much pain they're in. How do you show them the value of visualizing their workflow?
This is actually, I'm smiling and somewhat giggling, because this is the hardest part of this whole world that we're talking about, so whether you look at the work that you do, or whether you look at the predominant work that a lot of your audience does, so whether that's agile coaching, or, any type of like an HR leader in a company that's trying to take somebody through a company through this transformation right now, is that what we need to recognize is that in order to make this work, nothing about how we used to work in the past actually really applies to how we're working now. It's a fundamentally new mindset. It's literally the equivalence of like, and I don't think the globe has fully comprehended this. This is as big as they stopped using horses and moved to vehicles. Right. And then we moved from cars to planes. Like, this is the enormity of the change that we're going through. And so I think being upfront about how big that mindset is that people need to actually go through is actually the starting point of that conversation that you're talking about, because this process isn't moonshine and roses. This process is a painful process to go through. And so you really need to want it to actually be willing to commit to that pain that you're initially going to go through. And I know that's hard to absorb, but I think that's the reality, and we need to talk about it.
Yeah, and I think people had the impression of remote work as like we're all just hanging out on the couch in our pajamas, like in a laptop on the couch with our dogs and cats next to us. And the reality is we've all experienced over the world is it's not that. It is a totally different way of working. It's a new medium of work. That's what I always say. So I agree with you there. Yeah. How do you, so my question is, what is the challenge that you're really seeing with your customers and clients? What are the challenges that you're seeing them go through as we transition to this hybrid way of working? Are you seeing most people go hybrid or fully remote? I'll start with that.
So there's actually two completely different strands of thought that I want to take us down here. So I'll answer that second question first, and then I'll come back to the first one. Is most companies believe that they can do hybrid. And what their fundamental belief about hybrid is that we can take the best of what we had in person, and we can take the best of what we experienced during the pandemic when we were forced to be fully remote, and we can just put those two together and it's magically going to work. No, biggest myth on the planet, biggest lie that you're believing right now, don't believe it because it's going to fail. Because fundamentally at its core, those are two completely different working cultures. They actually diametrically opposed to one another. You can't have an in-person culture and a remote culture and think that they're going to work together. They're not going to work together. It's like capitalism and socialism, two totally different mindsets, two totally different behavior sets that drive the actual day-to-day activities. So what companies need to do is, you definitely can do hybrid, but the choice that needs to be made is, are we going to be a remote culture or are we going to be an in-person culture? And then kind of cascade everything down from there. So that's my quick 2 cents on that. Coming back to the biggest thing that we're observing, if I was to summarize it, and I think this is a very useful way for anybody like yourself or anybody who is in some shape of leadership navigating a group of people through this right now, whether it's a significantly large group or whether it's smaller teams, is I refer back to the Kubler-Ross change curve. Definitely recommend it as a very powerful resource for people. And essentially, if you look at the research that Kubler and Ross did, which yielded the output of their change curve, is that it essentially documents how people go through change. Okay, so we start on a high, and then we go through this very, very real place of anger, frustration, depression, before we accept our new reality and move into an acceptance mode where we actually start experimenting with our new reality and going, how do I embrace this as the new norm? Okay. And the interesting thing that the pandemic has done for us is that because of the way people spoke about it, it was something that we would get through. It wasn't, this is the new norm. So it's almost like people are having a bit of whiplash right now because they went through it knowing that they were going through it, but everybody believed falsely that it was going to go back.
Right.
And now they're seeing it's not going back. And so we basically back at the start of the change curve, going through the whole thing again. And so it's really critical that we recognize that right now the world is in that downward slope of that change curve, and that the dominant emotions that we're all feeling are a sense of anger, frustration, and depression.
Yeah.
We're not yet on the other side.
Right. Yeah, it's true. We did all have the expectation of like, oh, okay, once Delta's over, we're all going back to the office. And even I mean, I love working from home. And even when Omicron started hitting, I thought, oh no, here we go again. And I think it's collective. The world is collectively, oh knowing, here we go again. So don't despair. There is hope. We are going to come out of this. There is going to be a whole new way of working. Right. So I would say, I know we're nearing the end of our time, but there's still a few questions that I want to get to. So what would you say some of the solutions are in terms of how do we change mindset? What can we, like, you know, if there's a leader out there, I'm just trying to think of this like less abstract and more
very tangible.
Yeah, tangible stuff like what can I do to change my mindset, knowing that I've got the old dinosaur way of thinking?
I wanted to focus on 2 things. And these are very practical. Like anybody listening to this conversation that we're having right now will literally be able to walk out of this and go and implement this right away. The first one is that companies have to adapt an actual agile methodology inside their company. Okay. So, I mean, product development teams have been doing agile for years and years, like literal decades. Okay. So we moved from what people refer to as that waterfall mode, you know, where we used to sit down and say, okay, I need to design a system, and we like put out all the specs and, you know, everything was planned up front. And then we went into this deep dark cave and like tried to build this product. You know what I mean? Only for it to come out 2 years later and it's not at all what we wanted. And that's why the whole world of product development moved into agile mode, which is where it's this very quick iterative process where things are being released and tested, you know, on a very, very quick agile basis. This is a whole school of thought out there, but it's something that I genuinely recommend that companies who are moving into a hybrid mode and companies that are moving into a remote first mode go and adopt across the entire company. This shouldn't be something that only product development teams are doing. Finance teams should be working in agile. HR teams should be working in agile. Entire companies need to move into that mode. And the three reasons why, there's many reasons, but the top three reasons why it's so critical is because agile, because of the methodology and how it works, brings visibility. And that is what is so critical, because in-person gave us visibility. We've lost that. And the systems that we're using, the Zooms, the G Suites, all of those don't just organically give that visibility. So we need to actually build that. We need to architect that into our teams. Okay, agile is a very sound way to do that. The second reason why it's so critical is because it forces people to communicate and not to depend on that subconscious information absorption that they were doing before. And you referenced it. It's the conversation happening in the background that was so annoying, but you were actually absorbing a whole bunch. It's gone. So we have to bring that back into the company. And agile, because of the way it gets teams to communicate through daily stand-ups and things like that, forces people to bring that organic conversation back into teams. And the third reason is because it is a very good method to work with the systems that we currently have available. So if you look at the Jiras, the Trellos, the Mondays, the Asanas, the tools that people are using to get work done today, agile is very suited to those types of tools. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is companies need to understand that you approximately have an additional 20% work time every single day in a remote or virtual environment that you didn't have before. And that communication overhead, if it is not accepted, embraced, and actually put into place inside a company, will wear people down. That is the number one reason why people are burning out today, is when we were working in an office, we didn't have to communicate, like actually verbally sit down and communicate as much as we do in a hybrid and remote environment. And for the first time ever, we don't only have to do our normal day job that we were doing, plus all of the realities that are facing us in our homes, which we were able to shut the door on before, but we're now having to communicate more than we ever were before. And it's extremely exhausting. And so recognizing that, training your people to embrace it and find a way to do it well, and actually calling it out as a thing is critical.
Yeah, I love this. In fact, one, I have to say, your ability to keep your train of thought and to circle back on the points that you have, that, yeah, really kudos, amazing. I want to just shout that out publicly. I have to write it down in order to remember, but like kudos, like what a brain. But I love what you're bringing up, because just today I was listening to the Cal Newport podcast this afternoon, and he was talking about like the people are burning out and nobody seems to understand why. And the research is pointing to this overhead of communication. And in fact, he just wrote a whole article about this in the New Yorker of this is what's burning people out. One, the context switching going between our inboxes and our deep work, and our inboxes and our deep work. That's the one thing. But the other is this overhead of communication. So this is awesome advice for people, is really, we have got to get that under control. I recommend team agreements, but I'm sure there's many different methodologies out there for creating, like a plan for communication. Yeah. How did your team do it, if I can ask?
Agile. That's how we've handled it. Because the interesting thing about the agile methodology is it forces a very structured set of communication. So if you think about it, and I'm working on the assumption that most people understand the basics of agile. So let me just very quickly. Agile is where you sit down and commit to either 1 week or 2 weeks worth of work. Okay, you lock that into a sprint, and you and the team then deliver against that. Okay, and every day you're communicating to the team to say, this is how I'm progressing against this committed work, and this is how where I'm blocked. This is where I need X people in the team to unblock me. That at its core is what agile is about. If agile is done correctly okay, you're doing what you call backlog grooming. So you're essentially accumulating a whole bunch of work that needs to be done, and you're accumulating on what you term the backlog. Okay, so you're not allowing it to disrupt the current sprint. Okay. And that backlog grooming session where you decide what's locked into the next sprint is a very critical piece of communication that's happening inside the team. The second thing is what you call your sprint retro. So once the 2 weeks or the 1 week has passed, and you actually go and review how many of the points did we deliver on that we committed to. Okay, it's a forced form of communication in that ritual of agile. And then the third one is that daily stand-up, okay, where you're actually communicating to the team to say, I did X, this is where I'm blocked, and this is what I'm planning to work on tomorrow. And if you think about it, just those 3 basic rituals, okay, bring in a cadence of communication that keeps everybody on the same page. So you don't have this team of people scrambling, running around, trying to figure out what other people are doing. And it's very clear, this is the work that we're focused on right now. I can't do this because it's on the backlog. This is the sprint that I'm committed to, okay? And in teams that need even more agility, that can't just lock something in for 2 weeks, like for example, a sales team, because it's more driven by customer need, because that ritual and that structure is there, they can actually communicate fluidly and say, I had to move this off of the sprint and I actually had to bring this in from the backlog. And so it's the ritual, it's the methodology of agile that helps us to cope with that overhead. And at the same time, it doesn't wear people down because everybody's doing it.
It's visualizing the work at the same time. Like
Exactly.
we see what's going on. And there's retrospectives, which so many teams, I mean, we all could benefit, right? Like every team can benefit from regular retrospectives. So then this brings up one question, and I'm really cognizant of the time, but it does bring up one last question, which is, we've got all these forced and ritualized communications. One of the things that people are really missing is that informal time, like the team building, the hanging out, the shouting across the hall, like, Joe, how was the weekend? These kind of things. How do we build that informal communication in without burning out?
So if you think about it, think about how a family functions, think about how a friendship group functions. It's no different to that. You actually have to be very deliberate about it. You know what I mean? It's a family has to make a decision to eat dinner together or not to eat dinner together and to hang out in a different way. Okay. If you want to keep up to date with your college buddies, you've actually got to be pretty intentional about that. You know what I mean? And in a global world where everybody's scattered across the world, it actually takes a lot of logistical planning to get everybody into the same place. And that same level of intentionality needs to come into teams. So we actually have somebody designated over culture in our company, and it is their responsibility to put our activities together for us. So some of the things that we do in the company is we have a quarterly coffee date. No, not a quarterly, a monthly coffee date, where we randomly draw each other's names out of a hat. And then we just get on a call with each other and have a coffee. Okay. Some of our culture teams sometimes make them informal and literally just have a coffee date. Some of them are more structured, where, for example, we're not having coffee, but we're actually cooking lunch together. So we're on Zoom in the kitchen, but we're cooking lunch together. You know what I mean? So they give us activities. That's just one of the things that we do that are actually, the team really appreciates it and really enjoy it. It's structured, but it works. You know what I mean? Because it's that slot on your calendar. You show up and a spontaneous conversation happens. Like another activity that the culture team planned for us was she paired us up into pairs of 3 people, and we all got on a Zoom call together, and we actually had to plot our lives on Google Maps. So we had to plot our primary school that we went to, our middle school, our high school, our college, where we got married, where our first child was born. Like, she gave us all these. The conversation that sprung up from that session was just phenomenal.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Also
So
like,
it's
wow, we're all, yeah. So what I like is you have somebody
intentionality.
dedicated. You have somebody dedicated to the intention. Yeah, you're making the spontaneous intentional and a little bit more deliberate. So you're finding spontaneity, but within a structured approach.
Yeah.
Right. So it's different. I think it's really goes back to the main point that you were making, that this is a different medium of working. And one of the big mistakes that we're making is trying to take what we did in person and translate it online. And we have to throw it out. I like how you just said, like, throw it out. I was saying before, we need to mesh those worlds together, but I really like let's throw it out and start from the beginning. And I think that that's a better approach. All right. So, man, I have so many questions. But we're going, okay, but we'll have to talk again another time. But okay, so my last question for you then is, for what advice would you give for teams that are really struggling? Like maybe they're at the beginning, like they need to contact you. So that's definitely the advice, right? They need to contact you. They need to get pattern in place at their companies to really understand where the pain points are. But how would you advise people to start with this transition?
So yes, definitely. Please call us. We'd love to work with you. You know what I mean? But outside of that, let's assume that you don't pick up the phone and that you actually are going to tackle this internally inside your organization on your own. See yourself in the role of an architect. Okay. Think of an architect putting a blueprint together. Okay. Architects are extremely intentional about where they place a bathroom in relation to a kitchen, where the water cooler is in relation to the overall kitchen, and how it fits in with the overall meeting structure, and where the meeting rooms are. There's literally science and like decades and decades of research that has gone into office space design to make it function in a certain way. We're literally just starting to design online spaces. And nobody who designed Zoom, nobody who designed G Suite, nobody who designed Microsoft ever thought that the whole world was going to be using it 24/7 as their primary office space. So
Right.
you need to start with the inherent reality that those places were not designed for us to work 24/7 in them. So they're flawed. But within that flaw, you can start, you know what I mean? It's like going back to the very basics of, okay, we don't have a full blown beautiful office. We have a barn. Let's start with the barn. How are we going to make the barn work?
Right.
And then you literally have to get intentional. So what my co-founder and I have done for every company that we've built virtually is we've actually designed the spaces. We've been very intentional about how we've designed Slack, how we've designed Jira, how we've designed. And it's not something that happens once, it's something that is recurring. So the same person who's responsible for culture in our company and those activities is also responsible for keeping our online spaces. They are our online maintenance manager.
Love it.
And as soon as the team changes, grows, because different clients impact work differently, as new team members come on board, it changes the dynamic. You have to keep reiterating, you have to keep refreshing those spaces, and reiterating to people, okay, this used to be our set of rules, but because of this new customer project that we have, we're kind of pivoting. This is our new set of rules. You have to be intentional. And I think a lot of people, because we're in this like general state of exhaustion right now, are not doing that very intentional work. And that is actually going to be the thing that's going to help us get over the exhaustion.
Right. Is like take a step back, slow down, take a step back and rebuild with intentionality. Be a little bit more deliberate. Yeah. Because there is a wonderful world to be, when we get it right, the payoff is huge. I always say like,
it's huge.
Yeah, it's like, we as individuals get the ability to design our lifestyles around our work, which is a brand new concept in terms of work-life balance and living and all the opportunities that we get to have. And companies get a stronger and more connected workforce that is not dependent on location. If we can make that work, it's really huge. But it brings me back, and just as the last point of what you're talking about is, it's really important to understand what culture you are. If you are an office culture, don't try to be a remote culture, and vice versa. If you're a remote culture, like going back to the office is going to just be torture. So, and both kinds are totally fine. In fact, my husband works at a startup hub here in the Netherlands. And at the office, you can definitely see the people that were office cultures, they came back to the hub immediately because they needed to be together for whatever the reason was, like whether they liked it or needed it for whatever. And then there's others that they've never seen since. So there really are those two different kinds of companies out there. I recognize.
And I think it's very important, and I can actually use my husband as an example. So my husband is a serial technology entrepreneur himself. And interestingly enough, two of his companies right now, one has gone, and he, interestingly enough, was a huge advocate of in-person work before. Like he used to, when we started dating, he used to criticize me so heavily. He was like, your company is not going to scale. It's not going to grow. Like you need to become in person. And this was like one of the most heated debates that we would have. And I would just tell him to like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm way ahead in the future than you are. One day you'll come around to it. So, but interestingly enough, as the pandemic has played out, one of their companies has really stayed fully in person, and two others have gone completely remote, like completely remote. So I think that's also an important point that we should emphasize here, Lizette, is that it's not just a leadership thing. Some leaders can actually be both. It's a combination of the market dynamic, the customers you serve, the people you've hired, and just the general culture, and we need to figure that out.
And don't fight it. Like if you're office culture, don't fight it. Be office culture. Put those things in place that make, be office. Totally great. Nothing bad about being office. We're all just trying to survive this weird transition.
Exactly.
It really is a weird time to be alive, I gotta say. Well, Claire, I have so enjoyed our conversation. I've taken copious notes, as you have seen, so I'm really looking forward to putting these in the show notes. I think you had a lot of insight for this audience. I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. I've honestly really enjoyed the conversation with you. Thanks, Lizette.
All right, everyone. Until next time, be powerful.